Should you apply to a job that you're not qualified for? Although it's probably true for most job listings out there, entry-level jobs are the most notorious for having ridiculous requirements. And I add those quotes around requirements because they are always listed as requirements. But rarely are those skills and experiences actually a requirement for you to be able to accomplish the job that you're applying to. Now, obviously, there are several things that could come up on a job listing as a requirement, but I want to walk through some of what I think to be the most common types and discuss how important those requirements really are when you consider whether or not you should apply to that job without those requirements. The first is a degree requirement. Now, this one could be an associate's, bachelor's, master's, or even a PhD. Presumably, there is a legitimate requirement here. The easiest example is being a doctor. You need a doctorate and a certain number of hours of experience to legally qualify to practice. But assuming you're not watching my YouTube video to become an ER surgeon, most degree and certification requirements are simply an easy way to judge a candidate's general level of competence in a given field. After waiting a year of my life trying to get into a PhD program, I decided to switch over to the tech industry because I felt that if I could just do the job, I could get a job regardless of that degree. And largely, I was right. Honestly, IT is the perfect example of where if you can do the job, you should get the job. But even here, the hardest part can be getting the interview to convince them that you can do the job, especially when the job listing says something like bachelor's degree required and you don't have one. But if you can get that interview, that means they don't actually care. They want a person who can do the job. But a degree requirement like this is usually because they know that most students coming out of a computer science program have a minimum skill set that they can work with. Whereas if they open it up to any applicant, they're gonna have to spend more time vetting that individual. This type of requirement could be just to weed out some of those individuals so that they can do a little bit less work. Now, certifications. I'm kind of throwing this one in the same boat as a degree because presumably there could be legitimate requirements here, whether that is a legal requirement or simply a company policy. Some certifications are required for legal purposes. Other certifications are simply treated as a general indicator of somebody's level of competence in a specific area. For example, I work with ServiceNow. There's a basic certification called the CSA, Certified System Administrator, that can be difficult for even some experienced coworkers I know who are actually pretty good with the platform to get. But I also teach at a boot camp where we train people to pass that certification in about 2 months. See, the problem here is that you can study for the exam and still be a worthless practitioner. Now, sure, there's some overlap, but when it comes to getting the job done, I will take a skilled practitioner any day over a skilled test taker. Years of experience with whatever technology. Now, when they ask for a certain number of years working within a given technology, I think these are frankly the easiest to justify. If you were going through a technical interview and you answered every question right, would they care at all how many years of experience you had? Of course not. They care that you can do the job. Which is why I think years of experience with a certain technology is the one that you can just throw out the door. If you can use that technology and you can prove it, who cares what the requirement says? Sometimes they're gonna ask for leadership experience. Think about an individual who you've known in a leadership or managerial position who is a great leader. Now, think about a person you know who's been put in a leadership or managerial role, but shouldn't have been. There are people who fall into both categories, and they both might qualify as having the same years of leadership experience. Now, there are certainly skills that come with leadership. It is not just being inspirational. There's actual skills that experience can grant you that simply reading a leadership book can't. However, my point here is that 5 years management experience is only so valuable, but being a leader in any area of your life is going to provide you with some of those valuable skills that can translate into being a great manager, even if you don't have the required years of experience. Years of experience. I don't want to minimize the value of experience. Really, I don't. If you've ever changed industry, you'll know that just getting acclimated to the terminology, common software, best practices, policies, all of this stuff can be intense if you're brand new and are just picking it up from scratch. Even if you immerse yourself fully, it can still take time to pick all of these things up. But once we get past that initial entry into a new field, years of experience can be somewhat relative. All experience is not equal. Somebody can have 10 years of experience in a field and be less competent than somebody with 1 year of experience in that exact same field. All of this is to say that when I see 5 years of industry experience required, I'm skeptical that that is a real requirement. Just saying, oh, well, if they have 10 years of experience or 5 years of experience or even 3 years of experience, just using years of experience as a metric is a very poor metric. It can be an indicator, but is not a metric. Therefore, I rarely use years of experience as a true requirement. However, you can use it as a gauge to understand whether or not applying is useless or applying is something where you still have a shot. Job experience requirements are usual throughout all industries. Employers want employees with experience. If you were hiring somebody, wouldn't you? But I think people get too tied up in what a job listing actually says is a required skill. Sometimes job requirements are exactly that, requirements. You can't be a doctor without a doctorate. That's not just a nice to have. That is a legal requirement. 5 years experience with technology, now that's a nice to have. There are, of course, gray areas in between. Maybe 5 years of experience is a nice to have, but no experience is a deal breaker. So if you were to ask me, should you limit your job search to jobs you're qualified for? Absolutely not. Not only is there no reason not to apply to a job you're interested in, but there's every reason that you might be a great fit for the job, but that listing is just keeping you away. The first thing to consider, job listings and requirements are often written by HR, not the hiring manager. The hiring manager might provide a dream list of those qualifications, whether that's having a degree, years of experience in a certain role or technology or experience, whatever it may be. These are all things that make sense for a hiring manager to want in a new applicant. The thing is that these wants can be turned into requirements when they get communicated to the person who will end up actually writing and posting the job requirement. This is not to say that job listings are worthless and we can simply ignore the requirements, though it does simply open the door to the idea that just because a job listing says a skill is required does not mean it is actually required. The second thing to consider, you don't need to be the perfect applicant, just the best applicant. Have you heard? Demand for workers is high. Granted, this can vary from industry to industry, but it's hard to know just how desperate a company is for new employees. If you're applying for a team who is 3 members short and you're one of 2 applicants, they might not have the flexibility to be too choosy when it comes to new applicants. The hiring process usually isn't transparent enough for you to really understand this, but the point here is that every job you apply to may or may not be willing to ease up on those requirements if it means the difference between having somebody to work or not. The third thing to consider here, they want somebody who they feel can do the job. Requirements are just the easiest way for them to filter people out. Especially if we're talking about online job submissions, it is entirely possible that your resume isn't even getting past the algorithm. This can be a struggle, but that's all the more reason to customize each of your resumes to include keywords from the job listings. But if you made it to an interview, that means your fate is in your hands. An interview request means they're giving you a chance. You made it in the door. Now you need to sell yourself. And if you want to know how to do that, check out this video right here on how answering the question, why we should hire you, is the most important thing that you can master when getting that next job.